Hello and welcome to our webinar, Listen Up, Literacy Experts Decode What It Takes to Teach Kids to Read and Comprehend. I'm Lizzie Latanzio. I'm the VP of Marketing Communications here at Metametrics. If my name or face doesn't look familiar from the invite, do not worry, you are in the right place. We talked about this webinar and decided to change the format up a bit and make it more discussion-based. So I stepped in as facilitator. And I am joined today by Jing Wei and Tammy Miller, our speakers. Jing is our VP for AI and Product Innovation at Metametrics. She is a visionary leader in AI strategy and innovation. With more than 15 years of experience in test development, measurement, statistics, machine learning, and product development, she is at the forefront of shaping our AI capabilities and driving their impact. Before joining Metametrics, Jing led groundbreaking research as a research scientist at the Center of Applied Linguistics. Her work included the development and validation of high-stakes digital assessments used by millions of students annually. We're also joined by Tammy. Tammy is a literacy champion with over 35 years of educational experience. From teaching to leading schools and advocating for the right to read, she's a dedicated force in addressing our nation's literacy challenges. Currently, as Chief Academic Officer at Readable English, Tammy combines her expertise in systematic change, curriculum, and operations to turn around schools in complex situations. Tammy is also a results-driven solution tree consultant. Thank you so much for joining us, Jing and Tammy. And we will get started. As we get started, could you all provide a little bit of background about the two organizations for anyone in the audience that might not know about Metametrics or Readable English? So, who is the organization? What's their mission?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by introducing my organization, Metametrics. So we are an edtech company based in North Carolina, Durham. And our mission is to bring meaning to measurement. And we do this by using conjoint measurement so that we can match students to content at the right level. When students are reading the content at the right level, they would find it challenging but not frustrating, and they would enjoy reading a lot more. And the more they read, the better they will get, and their reading growth will accelerate. So we work with more than 1,000 partners to measure their books, contents, and we also believe that our classrooms need better assessments, not more assessments. So we think better assessments are assessments that can provide actionable results. And that's where the Lexile framework is coming in, so that we match students with the content at the right level and provide actionable results.
And I'll say a word about Readable English. I'm so grateful for the partnership that we have with Metametrics, because I believe that the integrity of their assessments combined with our Readable English tools is a wonderful approach to how we can solve the reading struggle that many of our kids are experiencing. And I just want to also mention too that in this partnership, I feel like we're all headed in the same direction, and that is to get kids reading at grade level. That's the mission of Readable English. So Readable English is a built-in pronunciation guide for every word. It's digitized so that students can access the pronunciation inside a learning portal or as a Chrome extension for any digital material. This, combined with the Metametrics Lexile frameworks, and we're going to learn more about all of those from Jing in the webinar, actually provides the perfect solution with the combination of assessment and instruction for improved results. So more to come on Readable English as we go through the presentation today.
Thanks so much for that background. So there continues to be data after data that shows that students aren't making the gains in reading that they should be. Tammy and Jing, can you talk about this reading crisis and how Readable English and Metametrics joined forces to address it?
Yeah, absolutely. So just by reading the most recent data from NAEP, it looks like we only have about 1/3 of the fourth graders that's reading at or above the grade level. And that percentage has been consistently low over the years. And if we look at the results from the past 2 or 3 years, the percentage of the students even dropped a little bit because of the pandemic. So I think that is deeply concerning. Although I think because of all of my academic training, I have become like deeply cynical. So I'm not really sure that we need to invoke the word crisis to be able to draw people's attention. But I believe, if we just look at the data, there is something wrong with students reading, and we need to pay attention to it and also take action.
That, I just want to chime in on that really quickly too. This is what I have come to believe after all the years I've had in education. My lens has always been literacy through any of my roles as an administrator in a building or at the district level. And what concerns me the most is the story, but I feel like there's a bigger story. So yes, we have the reading crisis, and there's more to this. Why are we flatlined in the NAEP data for 4th and 8th graders? In other words, they're not reading proficiently at grade level. And this has been true for 30 years when you look at the flat line. So I want to propose that we ask a bigger question. Why is that the case? And we know that our teachers are working hard. We know that we are having more and more innovation in education. But we have to stop and ask ourselves, as hard as we're working and our students are intelligent, what is going on behind that data? So if you ask yourself that question, what you find out is that the English language is extremely difficult. Just to read the 1,000 most common words, you have to have automaticity recall with over 520 rules and exceptions. So this is a huge cognitive load on the brain. And now that we know more about the neuroscience of reading and how the brain actually functions, you combine this with a flat line of data, understanding the English language is extremely difficult and it's not actually brain compatible, you start to have an understanding of why this problem is occurring. And we actually need a viable solution. I believe that today, Jing and I are going to share with you a viable solution between Metametrics and Readable English.
Very exciting. Could you all actually expand more on that solution?
Yeah, sure. So I think for any of the solution to work in a classroom, we really need to pay attention to 2 sides, the assessment side as well as the instructional side. So, because these 2 sides actually go hand in hand and feed into each other, we use assessment to gauge learning outcomes and to inform teaching. And also oftentimes what we assess would have washback effect on what is being taught in a classroom. So however, in spite of the importance of having these 2 sides going hand in hand, our educators sometimes struggle with what they can do with the assessment results. And it's not their fault, because after they get students' assessment results from the report card, it shows the percentile that the student score is falling onto, whether that student is achieving above the grade level or below the grade level, but there's no specific action or instruction on what they can do with that scores. So I think that's why Lexile framework comes in. So we really make assessment results actionable by creating a direct link between student assessment results and the materials that can help them get better. So Lizzie, if you can show our famous Lexile framework for reading. So here you can see that, we have students' reading ability on one side, and then we have the Lexile text measure on the other side. And we create a direct link between those 2. So whenever students are have taken a state assessment, they will get a Lexile measure as long as the state assessment is linked to our Lexile scale. And they can take that Lexile measure and go to the library, find a book that is at the same or similar level as the Lexile measure they get from the test. And that reading material would be optimal for their reading growth. So the solution is really elegant and simple. Of course, it takes a dedicated team of psychometricians, reading experts, AI engineers to go through a lot of complex math equations to come up with a simple solution like this.
I just wanted to chime in really quick there, Jing, and talk about that global comprehension piece. So for years as a building administrator, and I have been around a long time, so it was a while ago, I heavily relied on the Lexile framework for purchase of materials and making sure that I had the Lexile range available to my students and my teachers. I also leaned on the framework heavily for intervention. And now that we know more, we understand that we have in that the global look at comprehension needs to be expanded. We need some other data points to really hone in on how we can teach each student to exactly what they need, kid by kid, skill by skill. So luckily, Metametrics has done that.
I know, because we hear you. So our global indicator for reading comprehension has been working really well over the years. But as the field evolves and as our understanding of reading comprehension, how reading comprehension is working evolves, we discover that having a global indicator is not sufficient. So Lizzie, if you want to show the rope, yeah. So I think this Scarborough's reading rope really represents the conceptualization of skilled reading really, really well. There are so many strengths that are actually woven into skilled reading. So it is not sufficient just to know whether a student is skilled or not skilled. It's above grade level or below grade level. We really need to hone into those sub-skills and understand, is this student good at language comprehension or word recognition? What is the area that they would need more support? Is it language comprehension or word recognition? So only when we have those information from these sub-skills, we are able to hone our instruction to target those areas that students need more support. So that's why we expanded our framework from reading comprehension to other areas. Lizzie, if you want to show that. So, as you can see here, we started with only having one framework. Now we have 3 frameworks with these 2 additional new frameworks that are focusing on listening comprehension, which is part of language comprehension. And then we also have oral reading that is mostly focusing on decoding skills. So since oral reading is probably our most recently launched framework, I would like to maybe spend a little bit of time explaining our thinking behind it. So for oral reading, when we first launched the framework and we presented this to our partners, they were really surprised about why we create a new measure in addition to words correct per minute or WCPM, because words correct per minute has been used as the de facto standards in measuring students' reading fluency for so many years. But then we offered them an explanation. So in fact, if you think about it, WCPM is not really a scale. So Lizzie, if you want to show the little graphic representation, I think we really like this graphics because it brings to life so much about what a student's oral reading experience would look like, right? So if you think about WCPM, it is actually a performance indicator that is subject to influence by 2 factors. One is students' oral reading fluency. The other factor is actually the difficulty of the reading passages. Sometimes we only pay attention to students' oral reading fluency and neglecting the impact of the passage difficulty on students' performance. So if we think about how students actually perform an oral reading task, is almost analogous to someone that is paddling over a hill. So if they are reading a very difficult passage, it's like paddling uphill. If they're reading an easy passage, it's almost like paddling downhill. So when we are measuring students' oral reading proficiency, it is very important to account for not just WCPM, but also the passage difficulty, whether they are riding uphill or downhill. And we accounted for that and created a new measure called Lexile oral reading measure. So I know that Tammy, Readable English is our proud partner. It is the first organization that adopted our full literacy solution, all three frameworks. So maybe can you say a little bit about how Readable English actually incorporated the Lexile frameworks in your assessment solutions?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to take a pause and actually really affirm everything that you've said as being so valuable in the field and for the practical application. So until this past year, we did not have our partnership with Metametrics, and we relied only on the words correct per minute in our coaching model for literacy to help move students along. And it really falls short because it does not include the difficulty of that passage when it stands alone. So I'm extremely excited about the framework, the oral reading fluency framework that Metametrics has created, because as we will show you some data later, I believe that component for monitoring the student progress with word recognition and word volume, along with the comprehension, is a huge part of the solution for our reading issues that we're having in the country. But I also want to say that inside Readable English, which we're going to talk about, it's really important to understand that the comprehension rate will not improve if the students do not have a high word volume. They can only have a high word volume if they can pronounce the words correctly. So let's move on, Lizzie, to that next slide. Thank you. I did want to share this with you. So this is actually the slide that shows the marriage of the Metametrics work on the frameworks and the Lexile frameworks and the Readable English component. Inside of our Readable English portal, we have these reports. There are many, many reports, but just to simplify it, you see in the top right corner, this is our ORF results for the oral reading fluency that comes from Metametric scales. And then on the bottom, you see two comprehension measurements. On the right, you see listening, and on the left, you see reading comprehension. And it's these three Lexile frameworks that help inform our practice and improve the instruction in the classroom because we have up-to-date information. So within these frameworks, we have both benchmarking and progress monitoring. It's very difficult to find a valid and reliable progress monitoring tool for comprehension. Definitely for reading comprehension, but even more so for listening. And because we now have all three of these built into the actual system, not just for the assessment component, but now we're going to get into looking at what is the instructional tool that actually grows these measures with each student. Let's go ahead and move on to that next slide there. So this is introducing Readable English. And what you see here is a built-in pronunciation guide for every word. And what this accomplishes is orthographic mapping. So in the reading process, we need to be able to pronounce the words correctly. That's the phonics, phonemic awareness component that's absolutely critical. And what we're trying to get to is comprehension. So by having this built-in pronunciation guide, we can actually move students faster to memorization of those words in their long-term memory. It moves them to the long-term memory very quickly. So what you see in the markup of Readable English, the letters that are grayed out are not pronounced. You see the dot between the pronunciation breaks that divides the words. And then you see a mark above the I. This is a glyph that helps give the pronunciation of the word. And what's interesting or really critical to understand is that all of this has been condensed so that students have much less of a cognitive demand to pronounce the words with the glyphs. There are only 21 of the glyphs. There's never an exception to any word. It's always accurate. When you see the glyph, it's going to be the correct sound. So this gives confidence to the reader, to the student, and also helps them to move quickly. So they can accelerate very quickly when they can actually pronounce these words the first time, or quickly get to move them to the long-term memory. Let's go on to the next slide to take another look at this at a maybe a deeper dive. So when you see pronunciation guides, these would be some familiar pronunciation guides that you might see. And the one that I've used the most in my life is the dictionary pronunciation guide. But notice when you look at the dictionary pronunciation guide and Readable English, there's a very significant difference. And that is the fact that Readable English keeps the spelling intact, which is really important in the mapping process. So now you see the word spelled correctly, you can pronounce it correctly, which means you hear it correctly, and you can connect it to meaning more quickly. This is the secret sauce to accelerating students, because they can actually decode multiple words very quickly and move them into that long-term memory, which in turn impacts our comprehension. If we have a higher word volume, we have a higher probability of achieving in comprehending what we're reading.
Sorry, I have to interject here and ask a question, if that's okay with you, Tammy.
Sure.
I feel like the way that you describe glyph sounds really, really fascinating. And just based on the way you describe it, it's almost like a scaffold that students can use to decode easier because the orthographic mapping now becomes a lot more simpler. So I'm just wondering, like, how well students can actually crack the code after the scaffold is removed. Are they able to decode the words without the glyph?
Yes, I'm really, really glad you asked that, because I don't think any of us would be in this webinar if our students continued to need the glyphs to be able to read the words. So because of the way the brain maps the words, once we have the pronunciation correct and we connect it to meaning, we don't need the glyphs for that word anymore. The glyphs can go away. I'm going to show you some data eventually in our presentation that demonstrates how even on standardized tests, state standardized tests, which of course could not include a pronunciation guide, that transfer of the word recognition and comprehension is there because of the high achievement students are accomplishing using the combination of the metametrics Lexile frameworks as well as the Readable English tool.
I'm sold.
Me too.
Well, and I wanted to add something here too. Another thing that can happen when students do not pronounce the words correctly is that they can fossilize the words in the long-term memory incorrectly. And this is very something that happens more often than we realize, particularly with our English learners or students who are struggling. So they make a guess at a word or an approximation of the word, and then they store it. But unfortunately, when that word is stored, it's often incorrect. So they continue to read it incorrectly. And that's another reason why this is so powerful, so that they can get it right the first time.
I see. I have a child that is an English language learner, and she just started to learn how to decode words. I can't wait for her to try this out. So just out of curiosity, I mean, how does the conversion really works? I mean, can we just take any plain text and then convert that into glyph? I hope that we don't really need some poor annotator to go through the text word by word and manually annotate everything.
Well, I'm anxious to show you this because of all my experience in looking at different opportunities for how to get children to read at grade level. What we don't want to get bogged down with annotation by the student. We've had systems that work that way, but they're slow. And we need to accelerate this learning process to get them reading. So we have actually a digital approach that does this for any printed word. So let's take a look at the next slide to show what that really looks like. Thank you. So what you see here is every word has the built-in pronunciation guide. This means that now students can read entire sentences, paragraphs, pages, chapters, books, because it can all be, they can see it with the built-in pronunciation guide. Now, inside of Readable English and the Learning Portal, it can be selected that the words are actually in standard English, which would be similar to an e-reader on other types of digital products that are out there on the market. So you would see, it would just simply be like reading, off of any handheld device. However, with a click of a button, it can build in the pronunciation guide for an entire page, chapter, book, or just an individual word. And then in addition to that, so just to piggyback off of that, here's the real value that I've seen for students that are actually struggling. We are not only experiencing a reading gap with our students, but when they're far behind in reading, they have a knowledge gap also. And that knowledge gap and reading gap continue to grow until they can decode and read the words and comprehend independently. What unfortunately starts to happen at a certain point when the text is more complex, we end up reading it to the students or giving them a tool that reads it to them instead of ensuring that they can read independently. Readable English prevents that from happening because all of their content, science, social studies, English, math directions, math word problems can be converted so that they can decode the words and store them in the long-term memory. Once the words are stored, don't need the glyphs for those words anymore. So that's really the power of Readable English, to be able to do this in large volume and to put the student in control so they're autonomous. And this is what we've seen that actually grows the confidence so rapidly. Students now have certainty about pronunciation, and they also have a tool that gives them autonomy. When they need help, they have it. They don't have to depend on an educator to give them that support. So let's just move on. I did want to mention before Jane jumps in here that Readable English does have an element of AI to it. Of course, not nearly to the degree that Jing is going to talk about with the Lexile frameworks. But because of our understanding of the use of AI, we're really, really thrilled with what Metametrics has done to make sure AI has integrity about it. And I'll leave it there for Jing to pick up.
Sure. Well, I was gonna real quick ask the question. Yeah. So Jing, everywhere I turn, everywhere anyone turns, you hear all about AI transforming, different industries, including edtech. Can you talk about how AI is leveraged to evaluate student ability and the difficulty of content on the Lexile scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been in the field from the very first beginning, right? The first framework, Lexile framework for reading, was actually built with a machine learning algorithm. It's just, 30, 40 years ago, we don't call them AI, we call them machine learning. We were really nerdy. We have AI in our DNA from the very first beginning. So, I mean, these days, especially with the launch of ChatGPT, we heard these concerns from media, from the public discourse that AI is going to take over all of the professions and even some of the companies. So there's definitely some kind of level of either, panic or some aspirations maybe from some of more tech nerdy crowd about what AI can do. But from the perspective of Metametrics, I'm not worried about, ChatGPT or anything taking over Metametrics at all, because I think the way that we approach AI at Metametrics is very unique. And I would like to highlight two characteristics of how we actually build models. So the first is called data mode, and that's kind of our big differentiator. So if you think about ChatGPT, it's actually based on foundational model. So what that means is it is a large language model that learns a lot of patterns by ingesting all of the data on the website. It's crawling the websites, right? So it's almost like a generalist that has a lot of knowledge about a lot of subjects. But what we do here at the Metametrics is we have models that are like a specialist, because we, over the years that we are working in this educational space, we have accumulated our proprietary data that are specific to each individual use cases. So to build reading comprehension models for young learners, we would collect early reading text and use that data to train our models. If we want to build a vocabulary model, we would use textbooks from different content areas, best-selling textbooks, and then we would extract a vocabulary from that corpus. So by using these domain-specific data sets, our models are able to work much more accurately for these content areas that we are functioning in. So we are almost like a specialist that is standing on the shoulder of the generalist. And by having our proprietary data sets, I'm not worried that any of the large language models will be able to function better than our models. So that's the first feature. The second feature is what I call responsible AI. And I think folks are probably bombarded by this word in a public domain, because when AI is being released, the people are worried, and then companies are trying to assure the public that everything is fine because we are responsible. But I would like to say that we do not take that word responsible AI lightly. We really adhere to the principles of responsible AI throughout the process that we build our AI solutions. And that is implemented here, as the table shows, that we actually took into consideration of responsible AI principles when we start to design and planning an AI solution, to collecting data, to building the algorithm, and all the way to deploy and monitor these models. So I would like to give you a few examples. The first example is how we actually employ the principle of transparent decision-making when we are selecting features. So we are not just trying to maximize statistical power when we build models. If we build a model that predicts text complexity, and say if we have a feature on word rareness, we would invite internal reading experts to look at the list of features and go through each one of them and to think about, does it make sense to include that feature in our model from the content perspective? Is this feature really related to the construct of reading comprehension? Can we actually explain that to our stakeholders? Only after going through these processes and verify that this feature makes sense and can be explained, we would include that feature. So that's why we are very assured about how our features are working, how our models are working, and explain that to our stakeholders. I know, Tammy, you mentioned a lot about AI models and how Readable English is also implementing it a little bit. I'm not sure if there's anything you would like to say about transparent AI or anything from a practitioner perspective.
Sure. If you could back up to the last slide there, Lizzie. Thank you.
Sure.
I just want to reiterate and affirm what Jing said for the education community, to have that human touch in the transparent decision-making and the feature selection. Jing explained this to me in detail this week when we were preparing, and I'm actually just, I'm in awe of the work that goes behind the selection process, and it gives me a great sense of comfort and peace to know that I can trust in these assessments and the expertise that has gone into developing them. I just wanted to say that because it's really important for educators to know how critical that is, and that you take special care to make sure there's integrity. But then also, I wanted to ask you, Jing, what are the practical applications for educators based on this responsible AI?
That is an interesting question. I think maybe let me explain it by giving you another example. So most recently, we have developed automated essay scoring solution for an international testing publisher. So what that does is we built AI models that can read student essays and then automatically return a score to give feedback to students on how well they actually wrote that essay. So the way we built that model is we use the statistical approach of getting the features, and then we invite our experts to evaluate those features, make sure that they are actually construct relevant. And after we build and deploy that models, we do not just leave it there. We actually continuously monitor these models and see how they are actually working. Because the interesting thing about AI is, especially in the context of assessment, is students are really, really smart. They always try to game your models and figuring out, what can I do to make my scores higher?
Yes.
So it's almost like a cat and mouse game. We have to continue to monitor the data and seeing, what additional like new behavior students are demonstrating, and make sure that we can capture, that new behavior and make sure our models are continuing to be working well, and kind of be able to be robust to any of the gaming behavior that students demonstrated.
So really, really fascinating. Thank you both. So now we all kind of have a better picture of how the Lexile frameworks work with Readable English's pronunciation guides alongside with AI. Tammy, question for you. How are you seeing this solution when it's implemented? How are you seeing it impact student achievement?
Well, I'm excited to show this data to everyone. If you could go on to the next slide. Thank you. So what you see here is data from an Indiana school district, and this is a cohort group of students on their state standardized test. So the state standardized test in Indiana is called ILEARN, and this is 1 year of data. And what you see is 3 different grade levels represented: 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade. If you look at one single grade level, you see that the gray bar represents general education students. The orange bar represents students with IEPs, and the bluish bar represents students in tier 2 and tier 3 needing support for reading without an IEP. So the students in the orange and the blue received Readable English services during this particular school year, which was school year 21-22. Those of you who have been in education for a while know that it's very difficult to move the needle with our struggling readers, and really difficult with our students who have an IEP. But what you see here for 4th grade is that students with an IEP actually grew on average 55 points on the state test, which is really rare. And then you see with the blue bar, even our tier 2 and tier 3 students grew 61 points on average on the ILEARN test in 1 year. And then if you look at grade 5, you see the same trend with a really big number of 88 for the IEP students. And then the same for 6th grade. You see the same type of trend. So the reason I wanted to show you this is because this is the 21-22 school year that leverages the rest of the story. So if we could move to the next slide. So what happened in the same story in this school called Pine Village Elementary, the principal there is Carmen Akers, and Melanie Nelson is the district coach. What happened was they got such tremendous results in 21-22 by providing Readable English to their students with IEPs and tier 2 and tier 3, that in the next school year, which was 22-23 that just ended in May and June, they gave it to everybody in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. What happened was they doubled their test scores on the ILEARN state test. So this particular cohort group here went from a 36% pass rate to a 70% pass rate in 1 year, which educators know is really unheard of. If you were to talk to Carmen Akers, the principal, because I interviewed her, I really wanted to understand, what do you credit this to? Did you have personnel changes? Did you change the schedule? Did you use another intervention? Did you have a new reading adoption? What were the variables that could have impacted this result? And she will tell you herself that there was nothing else that impacted the result except the fact that she expanded the use of Readable English to all of the students in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So in this particular cohort group that you see in the graph, you can see in the gray box for school year, the very first school year, no 21, no readable English on the state test results. And you see the low median score of 5,365 and the high median score of 5,630. Then in the orange box, you see school year 22 ILEARN state results, where about 43% of this cohort group was using readable English. And that was the tier 2, tier 3, and students with IEPs. And you see how much that bottom median score moved up along with the top median score. And then that was the year that they said, all right, next year, all 4th, 5th, and 6th grade will get readable English. And in this particular cohort group, you see that the median score moved up again. So the entire class, the entire organization for that group in the cohort moved up. So you see that trajectory over time that resulted in 23 ILEARN results of 36% pass rate to a 70% pass rate, which in the education world is quite remarkable. So I'm very proud of those results and all of the hard work that went into it.
Yeah, it makes me really envious of Pine Village Elementary School because they are able to adopt the fantastic curriculum for readable English and achieve such phenomenal growth. So I guess that brings me to a question of like, so who else can be a great candidate of adopting the readable English curriculum? I mean, what other students are appropriate for using the curriculum?
No, that's an excellent question. So I just want everyone to know that these results are something that can be replicated. We know that we have to implement with fidelity, but when we help the students and scaffold that decoding, it can accelerate them really quickly to improved comprehension. So we partner with lots of schools and districts across the country. Our sweet spot is grades 2 through 12, although we do have some schools who implement at a K-1 level as well. Oftentimes schools will start with their English learners. We've had huge success with our English learners. And I just wanted to really talk about those EL learners quickly. As a former supervisor and administrator over the English Learner Program, typically what I've been exposed to in the market for the English learners is a lot of conversation building tools and content building tools. However, there hasn't been much available for decoding the actual print. So with Readable English and that rich conversation and content background and those tools combined, you can get huge results for that population. You saw some results with special education and the data I shared, as well as tier 2 and tier 3. We provide coaching and professional development in all that we do. Our mission is for teachers to be literacy experts. So we hire the best in literacy that we can find. We, in fact, also try to ensure that they are dyslexia experts as well. And then we provide literacy coaching across content areas. We also have schools and districts that are working with us on future employment skills and preparing the workforce. Because what's happening in the workforce, we see that students get to that pinnacle where they're ready to be in the workforce, but they can't read the manuals or the directions because they don't have that support. So we're beginning to work with organizations to make those conversions into the pronunciation guide in those situations as well. We work with schools on tutoring programs. We work with individual tutors as well as after school programs. And then of course we have some online schools that work with us as well. And that's also a really good opportunity because Readable English is all digital. And then in addition to that, just like the Metametrics partnership that's been so powerful, we work with online curriculum providers, also other English language learning programs, as I mentioned, publishers of novels and textbooks, digital learning platforms, and then any type of partnership that involves Readable English as an accessibility tool. We're finding Readable English as a very powerful accessibility tool, and it's a new innovation in the market that had not been considered previously. So these are all of the ways that we can partner with both schools and districts, as well as other companies that are servicing education community and education, providing education resources.
Very, very helpful. So Tammy and Jing, thank you so much for joining. Want to just have some closing remarks. Want to reflect on what Jing said, that assessment and instruction are two sides of the same coin, that you need both to make a powerful solution. And that's why this partnership with Readable English and Metametrics came along so naturally. We are so honored to partner with Readable English and for them to implement our 3 Lexile frameworks and to place the product in the hand of the educators. And now we are going to move to questions. We already have 4. If you have a question, just put it in your Q&A panel and submit it. We have 3 right now about the glyphs. So the first one, these 3 will go to you, Tammy. The first one is this glyph system available somewhere?
Absolutely, it is available. On the next slide that Lizzie will share, you will see that you can go to the Readable English website, readableenglish.com. And let me be clear that there's 1 E between readable and English. And when you go there, you'll be able to fill out an information form that will come likely to me. And then I'll be able to reach out to you to help you with that.
Great. These next 2 questions are very similar, so I'm just going to combine them. The first question was, when do students learn the glyphs? The second one is, what is the order for when the students should learn the glyphs? Is it after 26 letters or together with them?
Thank you. Actually, the way our system is set up, we want the students to know their basic letters and their sounds before we teach them the glyphs. But we've noticed that some kindergarten and first grade teachers combine the instruction of the glyph sounds with their initial learning of letters. But we do like to start after they know them. That's where our sweet spot has been. And it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to learn the system. So that's what's really crazy too. It's because it's such a reduced cognitive load, students can learn those glyphs very quickly. They're mnemonic, they're videos, movements, songs, lots of ways to learn those glyphs. And we've even had some high school students learn the glyphs in 2 weeks. So I used to say, learn the glyphs as fast as you can and then start reading, because it's absolutely true. You can begin to decode almost any word once you've done that.
So this next question I find very interesting. And Tammy, this one's for you. As a dual reading, writing, literacy instructor, is there a statistically significant effect, positive or negative, of readable English on spelling ability? I would expect to see a negative effect, poor spelling outcomes, based on drawing students' attention to specific letters. This person also said, I'm also a scientist. So has this been published so I can see scientific results?
Right. So there is no research on the spelling component of this. However, I would like to talk with this person after the session because we are interested in more research in this area. So I don't have any research to point to specifically. Anecdotally, I've heard from teachers in the writing process. They see some improvement, but that's all anecdotal.
Great. And then we have a couple more questions. Someone asked, I'm curious about how it impacts students with dyslexia and dysgraphia. Is there any research on that or any other learning disabilities?
Yes, so we do have a peer-reviewed study that's been published for our students with special needs. And I could actually send that to Lizzie here to send out with the PowerPoint afterwards, if that's acceptable, so that you could see the results of that study. Ironically, the study was done during COVID, which was just unfortunate, it seemed, but actually what happened was we found that particularly with the special education students, while most of the 3rd through 8th grade special education students in the study regressed, just like all the data told us about the pandemic, the students that were using Readable English for a minimum of 40 hours, which is not much at all, they actually grew almost 10 percentile points in comprehension and 6 percentile points in fluency. So there is data to support the special education students who are receiving those services. And then could you remind me about the other part of the question?
It was just, oh, sorry, I was trying to scroll up and I moved the slide somehow. It was just, is there any research on that or any other learning disabilities? So I think you answered it.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And then one more, Tammy. So has Readable English been implemented in any adult literacy programs? Not for adult English learners, but for English speaking adults learning to read?
So the very first pilot that I implemented was with a group of older students that were in an alternative setting working toward their high school diplomas. And in that setting, the students that were able to triple their pass rate on the state test to get their diplomas. So in Indiana, in that year, which was back around 2016, there was an assessment called the end of course assessment. And it was the gateway to getting your diploma. So during that year, the students had accelerated so much in being able to read the more complex text. They typically 0 would pass the state test, or maybe 1 student, but there were 15 students who took the test and 9 of them passed and 2 missed it by 1 point. And I attribute that to the fact that all of their material for course recovery in this program was able to be converted into the pronunciation guide. So everything they were reading, they could now actually pronounce it and read it. So what they might have known through listening comprehension was now being applied in the reading comprehension as well.
Really fascinating, really powerful work. I think that is it. Looks like we have answered all the questions. Of course, if you have a question, you can still reach out to us and we'll get you an answer. Thank you again for joining, and I hope you guys learned something today. I certainly did. We will be emailing a follow-up email, so be on the lookout for that. It will have some of the things Tammy mentioned. It will also have a link to this recording as well as a link to the slide deck. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.